All right, Stu, thanks very much for joining us on the show.
No worries, mate.
You want to just start by telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into business, and a bit of your early journey?
Mate, I'm a third generation publican, to put it simply. My grandfather, who was an orphan actually, saved up enough money and started by buying the lease of the Sackville Hotel in Rozelle here in Sydney.
Yep.
He died, unfortunately, early in life in a plane crash he was piloting in 1969, 3 years before I was born. And my dad took the reins at that point and built the business significantly. And my brother and I originally in the 90s, after finishing school, got straight into the business. And I've got two younger sisters now that are heavily involved as well. So it's a real classic Aussie family business.
Yeah, right. Awesome. And so that was something you were always going to be involved in, right? You knew as you were even going through school, that was where you were going to be?
Well, I wouldn't say me. My brother, I'd say 100%. He was always headed that way. I was a little bit undecided, like a lot of kids are. I went to a boarding school, and I remember everyone was the same. You put on your university admission what you want to do. And I grew up loving and coaching kids tennis.
Yeah, okay.
I put down primary school teaching originally, and I was going to do that for a few years and then have a sort of look around. That was the plan, but Dad convinced me otherwise.
Yeah, okay.
So I
Yep.
actually came into pubs earlier than I probably would have, but I guess I was always sort of pointed that way.
Destined to go that path. How old were you when you first joined the business? No doubt you probably worked there in the different pubs as you went, through your early days. But what age were you when you first joined in a serious way?
I was about 22 when it became serious. So I sort of did a cadetship under my brother who'd been there seriously for a few years prior. And I learned every sort of operational side of pubs. And there, obviously, you don't have to be Einstein to work out that there's plenty of those. Even just tapping kegs in the cellar. I used to get beer showers. I was hopeless at it. But through those first few years, I actually worked out that I had no real interest in operations of pubs. And I tried. I'd done working in bottle shops, bars, relief management, security, for God's sake. It was in the early 90s.
Yeah, right.
I really didn't enjoy any aspect. I mean, I had a good time, but as it sort of got towards the mid-90s, the whole business side of it, the stuff that Dad was doing really started to click with me. And I was much more mathematical than my brother. And he was damn good at operations, really good.
Yeah.
And so I sort of started pestering Dad. And it took a long time, actually, for him to let me into the more sort of big picture side of the business.
Okay. All right. So you and your brother, very complementary skill sets by the sounds of that.
Extremely. Yeah. And my two sisters, who are now, as I've mentioned, involved, have different parts. So the four of us work very well together, and it's been some years now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. In terms of, I have been reading that you've been on a bit of a buying spree, a bit of an acquisition spree in some of the articles I've read in the media. Is that what's your thinking and your rationale behind that versus, I mean, obviously pubs have been standout businesses through COVID and all those types of things still, and they're seen as recession proof. If we've got sort of like a slowdown potentially coming, what makes you or drives you to start acquiring now versus waiting or that type of thing? What's your thinking around the strategy?
Well, I keep referring to, Dad and three siblings. We're all a little, and some what do you call it? Some spouses are involved as well. Mm-hmm. We're all a little on different pages there, but sort of as we all throw our mud at the wall, we sort of get there. And I think basically the family sort of objectives right now, or certainly what we believe is happening, is that, in the last few years, poker machines became sort of front page again. Mm-hmm. We've never loved poker machines, but having said that, they were part of our business.
Yeah.
We can see that both sides of government are starting to, really look at problem gambling, and we're happy to work with them. And all the publicans are the same. But that will have eventually, and it's already started, but whether or not it's that press or whether it's the interest rates, but poker machines are off this year. So, the point there is we can't rely on that income forever. And we sort of turned that corner a couple of years ago. We've always looked to diversify. We've got a very solid business in accommodation hotels now with the Carides family. What you would have just read that we've just secured the Mirage up at the Gold Coast. But we have the Sofitel in Noosa, the Crown Plaza at Terrigal, and the Manly Pacific on Manly Beach in Sydney. And they're a great diversification for us. We have a couple of, little neighbourhood shopping centres. We have a couple of development sites, which, to be honest, we're all pretty green at, but learning as we go. And these sort of wings of our business are becoming more important as we turn away from, pure poker machine driven business. 10 years ago, you might have known that we offloaded a large chunk of our poker machine Western Suburbs hotels to the company now called Endeavour. We have a great relationship with them where we sell them leases and they take on the operational risk. So, again, you don't have to be Einstein to work out that at some point in the future, we may do another one of those rollouts. But, on a business as a whole, we're just starting. The last bastion is we're starting up to set up this family office to look at all sorts of diversified investments. But, Dad's 82, very much in charge. He's actually a dictator, really hard to get some stuff through. But family office is the last thing for him. He's always, like he was born in 1941. You got to understand, he sort of only ever known pubs. I've only ever known. But we're chipping away at it, and we've got some great mates who are helping us set that up. And then, we'll look at more diversification in answer to your question.
Yeah, that's a really interesting process, right? In terms of that family office phase, because then you're coming across the succession side, you're in terms of the generational side, the diversification of the business, and then the long-term legacy. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into that.
It's incredible. Well, I'm very lucky. Part of that, I mentioned I coach kids at tennis. I coach tennis going through school and a bit through uni. And just in an amazing coincidence, one of the blokes I coached was a guy called Gerry Harvey. Now, you might have heard of him.
Yeah, I have heard of him, yes.
91, the year after I left school, another coach and I started a Tuesday morning tennis comp in Croydon in Sydney. And Gerry and I partnered up. So the idea of the comp was a bit of hit and giggle.
Yeah. But
Gerry and I have now been doing that for 32 years on a Tuesday morning. Wow. We run in conjunction with the school terms. We have school holidays off. So I would suggest that Gerry's probably been my biggest mentor in life. Through this family business process, he sort of, I would suggest he's several steps in front of Dad. Not having a shot at Dad, but it's just the way that it is. And so I've learnt a lot on him, and so's Dad, to be honest with you. He's a very close mate. So through this whole family office and the diversifying and all the steps, it's a little morbid, the topic with Dad, and I can understand it. Yeah. But Gerry has been a great assistance. We've got a couple other mates. We're in business with a lot of people. Lang Walker, and we all sort of help each other. And but it is, as you suggest, it's a very interesting step that we're going through.
And it's a necessary step, right? It's one of those things that if you don't do it, it just creates bigger problems down the track. You're better off having the conversations, working out whatever. Some of them are awkward conversations too, or it's uncomfortable. Or you just got to do it.
Mate, my dad has one sister, and a beautiful sort of ending to the story. I hope they're getting close again, but that they had, I'm going to say 10 to 15 years of not speaking, all through succession. And we're all very aware of that. And as in the Laundy children. And we speak to Dad often about it. And we're sort of using that as a what not to do. And in a good way. That's my auntie Robin. She's a wonderful lady. But Dad and her are coming back together, which is lovely. But we're avoiding those pitfalls. And you hear some horror stories about succession. And you just
100%. Yeah. It's not an easy process, right? And it does take, and you've got to be able to sort of go through that process with an open mind. And I've seen lots of different families do that same process. And the earlier you do it, the better off you are to have that process in place. And it's often, driven by the kids to say, hey, we need to do this. And when the parents come around, they're usually like, oh, we should have done this 10 years earlier, is the common sort of theme that you do here, because they realize that it wasn't something they needed to put off. It was something they should have addressed earlier because of the benefits that come from it.
Yep. I can see, I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. And I think we're getting through there. Dad's a hard nut to crack.
Yeah.
I think we're getting through there. But, we've had an interesting 10 years as a family. I mean, my brother went and did 6 or 7 years being a politician and ended up a Liberal front bencher, with Malcolm Turnbull. So he was gone. My sister had had a huge corporate career through all liquor suppliers, amazingly, or pub suppliers. I'm talking Foster's, Campari, Coca-Cola.
Mm-hmm.
And her and her husband came back to our family business. I went through a divorce and did some stupid TV shows and stuff.
Right.
All a midlife crisis. And my sister, my younger sister, is the constant. Her and her husband have been in the business for 20 years now. And
right.
But I guess because we were all sort of in different stages of life, we all put it off. And then my brother Craig came back to the business 3 years ago. I put it at the forefront, and immediately, as I mentioned before, it was Dad's mortality was the main thing in his mind, and I felt tremendously sorry for him, actually, and I was on his side, But mate, can't agree with you more. You don't want to put it. You really for the, it's just for the greater good. You don't want family dramas. Geez, we all live once.
Yeah. And families are complex, right? That doesn't matter what size the business is, and those families are complex. But what I think is interesting is when I hear you talk about the different skill sets of all the people in your family. That's an interesting melting pot of skills that you can bring to that business, then, right?
Well, we've just got very lucky. Like, it just happened basically. Like, as I said, through the mid-90s, especially when poker machines came into Sydney pubs and values started to increase, I just became, and I was, again, honestly, playing tennis with Gerry every Tuesday morning, and we'd stay back after the comp, and I'd lend his ear for hours. And I just became this, I befriended all the brokers and just started wanting to do deals and transactions and that. My siblings were never interested in that side. My brother was operational, but he always had that political side too. So he was sort of, dealing with government. We're partners with government, basically. They're partners in our business with the taxes that we pay. That way, and no one else was really interested. Danielle was always off doing corporate. Justine was back on the design side. And now Craig and I have no clue on design. And Danielle, she's quite good, but she came back, and Justine, my little sister, had that set. So Justine and Richo came back with systems and operations, because they've come from multinational, worldwide companies, Coca-Cola, and they've just corporatized this sort of thing. So essentially, we've just got very lucky, because each is, funnily enough, not interested in the other one's role.
Yeah, and that part of it, right, when you're not interested, is so much harder to get involved in it. And if you don't have to, how much better is that?
Look, we're all publicans. Even we've got publicans' personalities. So our family meetings, there's usually twice a week. There's a lot of laughter, and quite often around that topic you just suggested. If my sister's speaking passionately about redesigning a pub, I'll sort of start yawning and go, "Come on, hurry up." We do. And I think it's made Dad very happy, especially. That sister from Coca-Cola, Danielle, she's been back for probably 3 years, and I can see as Dad turned 80, the last couple of birthdays, he's a lot more relaxed now, and I think he's sleeping a lot better. It's going well.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. Would you say what's your biggest strength that you bring to the business around that side of things?
Well, I've always had this mantra: make a friend will buy. And it's that retail mantra, and you don't have to guess who I got it from, but it's in my sort of, you call it deal doing, acquisitions, disposals, all that sort of thing. I've always tried at first to make a friend. I found it easier that way. If you go back to, I think, 2012, we sold maybe 40 leases to what was then ALH. Now, that company was 75% owned by Woolworths and 25% by the Matheson family. And that took me 3 years, and it was just me alone. Dad doesn't believe in investment bankers and that sort of stuff. And well, neither do I, as a matter of fact. It was very simple. I had pubs to sell and they were buyers. But I sort of rocked down to Melbourne to the front door of Woolies and basically said, right, here's a deal. I ended up with the Mathesons and Bruce Jr. It took us a long time to put it together. But Bruce Matheson Jr. and I would now be close to best friends. But we started doing this deal, and it was that make a friend will buy mantra from me. I've always had more success in acquisitions. If you leave a little bit for both sides as you go, you don't. My father's a lot more ruthless and went through the 70s and 80s and even 90s doing deals that way.
Yeah.
For the last 20 years, since I really got interested in this side of it, I've honestly left him out at most of the transactions till it's too late for him to get involved. And it's we've had some real dramas. It's sort of a clash of the titans because his old school, my new school way, it won't work. And at the end of the day, who's to say who's right or wrong? But for me, that sort of that make a friend has worked really well. I've got a huge network Australia-wide now of brokers and all that sort of thing that I entertain. I get out to dinners and play golf, and I try to be the first. This isn't reinventing the wheel, but I try to be the first who gets the info or get some exclusivity as quick as I can. And I've just found it, the nicer bloke you try to be, it becomes being a publican, the old school thing about being that bartender where you listen to the guy's problems there is. I noticed it with my dad. There's sort of a blood of a publican. They love having a laugh and that sort of thing, but they love entertaining, they love networking and all that sort of thing. So that's helped in my trail, of acquisitions and disposals, let's call it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You talk about the difference in the mindset of how you do a deal versus the sort of the older generation in terms of that, because really these days, more and more, you have to be that way to, almost do the negotiation on the other side's behalf to come up with something that's going to leave a bit on the table. But that also leaves repeat business there, right? As opposed to that where it used to be more transactional. And I know exactly what you're saying about sort of 70s and 80s and that sort of stuff with a different sort of world. And you wanted to extract every dollar that you could in most ways, because otherwise you're leaving money on the table. But it's a different world today, right?
I'm completely new school in that respect. Every now and then there's still room for dad, and I use when I need someone to be firm and blame him in a lot of ways. No, I'm not going to get that thing, but in particular dealing with the Matheson family was easy. We're longtime friends, but then we had to go back to Woolworths in the end because they're 75%. We had to get their board approval, and I ended up becoming good mates with, was it Fletcher at the time? I always forget his name, the CEO at the time. It was after Corbett.
Fletcher might have been Coles, was he, I think?
Well, who was the guy after Corbett? I've just forgotten.
Anyway.
It was, they were good to deal with. And as you say, a huge part was deal flow ongoing. We start this relationship, we can go develop sites, or we can just buy pubs, fix them up, give them into the Endeavour model. I say Endeavour now because they're Endeavour over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And that was, Dad really wanted to, just to finish on this old school, new school, Dad humble these guys and used to get the dirts that he wasn't involved in meetings because he wanted to humble them. He wanted to rip pubs out at the last minute and annoy them. But now I guess you'd have to ask Dad, but I think he sees the pipeline and where it's taken the family. We've enjoyed that rent roll and essentially got a very large property trust there. And, we've got companies like CLW, the Charter Hall one, that they took ALE over, but ALE were like us as well, with sort of property trusts with predominantly Endeavour pubs. We like the business.
Yeah. I love hearing the stories about the sort of old school stuff, but you've also got to, and you'd be more aware of this than I am, but you've also got to sort of really respect that mentality because that's what also made him successful, right?
Totally. I've had conversations with mates of mine because it's quite well known in the Sydney pub scene and amongst our friends that Dad and I clash. Now, we've been best of friends most of the time, but we clash because of this. And a lot of my mates give me, take the piss out of me and say, well, he's done pretty well. I've never argued that he didn't do well, and he still does well today. But, there's a reason that people retire at 65. There's a reason Joey Johns isn't playing the halfback for the New South Wales State of Origin team. You can. I'm 50 years of age now, and I see my brother's son coming through. He's 25, Charlie, and I see the future in him now. But we've got to learn to let go. And I'd never want. Dad has talents that I'll never have. He has talents that not many people will ever have. But on the acquisition side, on the deal doing side, part of that's passed him by, and I'm not ashamed to say it, because as I can see stuff starting to pass me by.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Great. Well, that's the whole point of a generational business, right? And like you say, the process you've gone through, when you look at the next generation coming through, you're going to be all the better for that, because there comes a time when you sort of hand over the reins and it continues on, right?
Well, absolutely. My sister Danielle, who I said is corporatised, her and her husband Richard, they've had a hell of a time getting it through, Dad. But funnily enough, their biggest advocates have been Charlie and Sophie, Craig's son and daughter, who are involved in the business, but they're right behind Danielle and Richo's corporatised model. Now, it's taken Dad, that originally Dad was going, oh my God, look at the layers of expense on this, worried about his bottom line. Now, this, at the end of the day, it was this modern thinking, but she's got the same qualms as me, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
That's awesome. In terms of technology and the way people have changed over time, in terms of customers of the pubs and the hotels and that sort of stuff, what are the biggest changes that you've seen, or have there been changes?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's little things. On Saturday night, I did a charity walk on the weekend, which was a nightmare actually. But on the Saturday night, we stayed at Crown Plaza Terrigal, one of ours, and we were all having dinner in the bar, and we saw the pub tab section. And one of the guys said to me, he still likes the system where you get your old card, you fill it in, and you go and put it in the machine. And I've never been a gambler. And as I said, the operational side of pubs I haven't looked at. And so I looked at it. It's been several years since I watched. The whole system's changed. You're not putting the cards in. Most people are doing it on their phones.
Yeah.
Just paying cash for a beer. The cash registers are almost redundant. It's just bang, bang, that sort of stuff. All the way through to big picture side of ordering stock and stock control. Yeah. It's wages, staff, clocking in, clocking off. When I started, you put in a timesheet and get a pay packet with cash in it.
Yeah.
It's all of those little things, the biggest things are now, completely ruled by technology.
Yeah, okay. And has it changed consumer habits as well, or has that remained pretty similar?
I guess it's hard, not so much in our hotels. We are, because Dad started as a suburban publican, that's sort of still our mindset. So that's where we grew up, sort of thing. So you have your different operators in Sydney, but you've got one very famous, your Justin Hems. He started in the mid-90s in the CBD of Sydney. So he started at the sharper end of the wedge than us. He had to do more to attract customers. He had a lot more competition. We were out in the suburbs with one pub per suburb. He was in the CBD with a pub every corner. Yeah. So for him, that sort of customer focus, don't get me wrong, we're trying to get there now, because over the years of diversifying our style of hotels, we've ended up with some wonderful pubs. We've got pubs dotted around Sydney Harbour. Yep. And, we're trying to chase Justin now, to be honest with you. But, the customer, as far as I can see, they're much more discerning. Again, talking about the offers, in the 90s, some of our pubs had a pie warmer for lunch. You'd have to get a meat pie from the pie warmer. Yeah. Now, you've got to give a damn fine food offering to get them in. The customer's a lot smarter. And as I say, they're just running around with their phone, tapping everything and doing that's. And there's databases, and we're punishing them with emails and text messages saying, come to our pub for Origin. It's all, they're much more discerning than they were.
I find the interesting thing in recent years is the when we were younger, we'd go out to I'm 47, but when I was younger, we'd go out to the pub, we have a beer or whatever you might have, right? These days, my kids are all in their 20s now, and they're all going out drinking. They're all having cocktails. They're all paying $25 a cocktail. It's like, firstly, I don't know how they all afford it, but they're all out there drinking cocktails. It's a different world.
I have a 20 and a 20. I've got 4 daughters, and the eldest are 20 and 21. And the 20-year-old rang me Saturday night about midnight for some cash because she'd run out. She needed to buy more cocktails.
It sounds familiar.
I still have a schooner. I mean, I had 2 schooners with that last night. But they're all, even the wines. The wines have exploded. Like, we've got major wine listed out some of our suburban pubs that, again, when I started, we didn't serve wine. I mean, we had wine to ask when I started. Now we have a really nice wine list. I mean, this is the changing pattern of the consumer.
Much more sophisticated consumers, I guess, is what it's
I'm a bit the same though. Over years, I've started to love my wine, so I can understand.
Yeah. I'll have a Negroni or something like that, and mine's 20 years ago, I wouldn't have known what it was.
Mine is sour, but I tend to only have them on holidays for some reason. But
they're a bit strong, those ones.
They are. But I've as the times have changed, it's sort of helped sometimes in pubs, especially when you're a customer as well as an owner, sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, in terms of advice you've received as you've gone along in business, what's the best advice you've received, or an example of some of the best advice?
I remember simple things. Lang Walker Lang Walker developed the Broadway shopping centre probably 20 years ago. And everything nowadays is like 20 years ago, sadly. But he developed, and there was a tavern he put in downstairs called the Off Broadway, and he put a tenant in there who sort of ran aground, let's call it. And I was good mates with his son. So we got the dads together who hadn't met, and they decided to go halves in this tavern that was in his shopping centre. Therefore, we developed a long-standing friendship. I got a text as we were speaking. Sorry.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Me something real simple. I think I was maybe about to buy a unit or something, and he just said, "Mate, whatever you're doing with property or even pubs, my advice is always have some water involved." He goes, "Or if you've got water views, it's the best thing of all."
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. And he mentioned that most of his developments, he's not exclusively, but he just loves the water because people love water. I mean, it sounds very, but this was 20 years ago, and funnily enough, I bought a unit with a balcony looking over the water at Drummoyne sort of thing because it influenced me. And then once we sold all those leases to Endeavour, I lined up a whole bunch of pubs for us to buy in this, and then I was diversifying into food and beverage. Someone else's, I don't know if that's affecting, but I was diversifying into food and beverage, and I brought Dad the Watson's Bay Hotel perched on Sydney Harbour over here. Northies at Cronulla, a famous one on the beach at Cronulla. Are we back? Yeah, Woolwich Pier at Hunt over there, which is looking straight over the harbour. Woolloomooloo Bay, a famous one down near the restaurants there. Manly Pacific. That was the first deal I ever took to Dad, actually, which is an accommodation hotel, but has bar and restaurant on the beach there. They were way out of our comfort zone, but I had these words of Lang in my ear, get water involved. And, true enough, and to his point, those properties, we've had the Manly Pacific, oh my God, it's gone up tenfold, on the beach at Manly. That's not my brilliance, don't get me wrong. We've had a 20-year boom in most things in the Australian economy, but I've watched them. People love waterfront pubs. I see the customers. So, look, that was just a simple one from Lang.
Well, that's 100% true. That is 100% true. Everywhere I'd go, if I'm going to book something, either if I go overseas or anywhere like that, I like to stay somewhere where I've got nice water views. If I go to eat, I like wherever it is, whether it's ocean, river, lakes, whatever. It actually just really adds to the beauty of the experience, right? So it's so simple, but it's actually really profound.
Little simple ones, Gerry always says, keep it simple, stupid, he says. But his mantra was make a friend will buy. He started selling vacuums door to door. So, he had to have that peachy smile and that. Now, it wasn't so applicable to me, but I sort of made it applicable certainly, when I was operational serving beers, you got to have a smile on your face. My dad, him and I have clashed in our ways of thinking a lot in life, but some of his pearls have always been, and they're classics. Don't carry too much debt. So in a time where pubs became the flavour of the month, which is the whole last 20 years really, the banks were up to 70-75% loans at times, but never ever taken more than 50 on a pub. Never will, never has. He's got a level of gearing he's comfortable with. And I've agreed wholeheartedly with that. So there are some pillars that between, Dad, Lang and Gerry, but hopefully that answers the question. A few good ones there.
No, it does. Yeah, absolutely. And, simple is best, right?
Exactly.
This stuff, even like something we were talking about there with the debt side of things, in times when interest rates get so low, it's really easy. And there's all the investment bankers and all the banks that are all trying to get you to leverage up on whatever, because it all results in more fees and more whatever.
Totally.
It's really easy to put those to the side because everything looks like it's going so great. And when you get interest rates going up now, which everyone forgot about for 10, 15 years, all of a sudden those simple principles, if you stick to them, matter, because there'll be plenty of other people out there that haven't stuck to those sort of principles and they would have leveraged up and they're going to feel pain. And, you just can't go from 0% rates basically to 4 or 5% and have no impact. So, that leverage matters.
Mate, that was the thing, in my lifetime and in my lifetime of transacting, the yields were between 15 and 20% when I first started looking at freehold going concern pubs, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking between sort of 5 to 7 times your earnings, let's call it. Now, the variables were earnings, you could lift the earnings of a pub, or if good, they'll go backwards. The other variable were interest rates. But, I was my whole time has been this sort of really favourable interest rates lifetime. But no matter where it went, because of Dad's words of advice, as pub yields got as low, during pre-COVID and even during COVID, some got as low as 4 or 5%. Now, granted, interest rates were, as you just suggested, 0.5% sort of thing.
Yeah, well, in terms of the bloody RPA rate and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. There was no way we were buying at that point because we knew that interest rates could go up. So, any increase in the trade, in the profit that we'd done would just get eaten away. But, and we can see the yields back to, honestly, they're getting back to sort of 7, 8, 9, probably creeping back to 10. It depends on interest rates. But, because of Dad, we're ready to pounce in case, that's basically to you.
Yeah, my personal view is that you'll get your opportunities in the next sort of 12, 18 months. If you're ready to, I think there'll be opportunities in all sorts of areas in the next sort of 12, 18 months, because you've got this once in a generation change of interest rates and people forget, right? People get really complacent about that stuff. But the people who are, remember the early 90s and all that sort of stuff, they always talk about that. My dad loved to talk about when I was doing this, interest rates got to 18% and it was hard. You think things are hard, this is hard. They all love that, but it's actually true because they lived it and they know the lessons and they learnt the lessons.
It is very true. Where this whole family office I discussed at the start, where because Dad's such a, lowly leveraged individual, that's where we're setting up that ready for obviously ready to pounce on different opportunities that might come up.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. And in terms of business people that you've sort of learned from and admire, even from afar, I mean, you've mentioned a few as we've gone through, but who are the sort of top few people that you might?
A couple of Australians I've forgotten is Bruce Matheson Senior. He's an incredible bloke. Really, he's the consummate publican like Dad. You just want to sit to him tell stories all day.
Yeah.
Him and his son Bruce Jr., fantastic guys. Who else? John Singleton. We had the Dane at Manly with him. He's a very entertaining, charismatic, but sharp as a sharp as a razor. Yeah, very sharp. I guess I'm not that well read, but I keep up to date with some. I'm nowhere near as political as my brother, but I quite often, Warren Buffett stuff gets thrown out there, but he seems a genius of a man. I've been interested in Musk because he's the new generation, and I thought, gee, at the time he did Twitter, and it almost like he got bullied into it, or his ego sort of had to do Twitter in the end. But I'm watching that interestingly. I know he's got heaps of money, more money than God, but I think he might be making a go of that. And I just read today, Telstra are starting to line up with one of his satellite companies. So, I mean, those guys, you know, it helps that they're men's students to start, but just the philosophies, you know, I'll always, if there's something that interests me, I'll take it on board. But yeah, it's worldwide. I'm always intrigued as to there's these rich lists that Dad hates, but they're all around the world. You know, the Forbes ones, and it's intriguing to read some of their stories. I have read a few biographies of Richard Branson.
Yeah.
He's a bloody intriguing man himself. But yeah, those are about the names, I reckon.
Yeah, there's some really interesting people out there, and there's always new lessons to learn. I mean, this is what I love the podcast, right? Because you get to talk to people who have been really successful in business, and they all bring a different angle or a different thought, and I always learn or get different insights from people, and that's what listeners love, right? Is just you're hearing from the people who have done it, and there's just and because every industry is different too, right? You have someone who's in pubs or retail, and then you have someone in a completely different sector that you've not even thought about. But it just shows people can be really successful in any industry if they're good enough. But the different industries, there's so many things that sort of go across all business.
Pieces. A mate of, a guy who was a lot younger than me at school. His name's Brett Kelly. He started at an accountancy company, and I think it's called Kelly and Partners. A couple of years ago, I think he floated it. But you go back a lot of years ago, and he went round Australia and interviewed, I think, 20 or 30 high net wealths and put it wrote a book about it, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I ran across him. He was younger than me in junior school, so I didn't know him that well, but we got to chatting. He's a good bloke. And he told me exactly what we've just discussed, how he took bits and pieces from writing this book was the most cathartic thing he's ever done.
Yeah.
And now he's a very successful businessman, and he's just cherry-picked the great ideas, and good luck to him.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's so much there to learn if you're willing to listen. The one thing I've always found is that it comes down to execution.
Yeah.
You can have all the different thoughts or advice, but you just got to execute. And a lot of that just comes down to discipline and consistency, right?
Definitely. And confidence. A lot, there's been times where I've second guessed, and I've loved having Dad as a backup.
Yeah. Okay.
You need some confidence to really, especially if you're having a big swing,
Yeah. As in confidence in terms of, yep, you've done all the work, go for it. Or what do you want to expand on that just a little?
Certainly in the pub game for the last 20 years, every time I've sort of nailed down acquisitions as, we're buying, I'm always wondering is this going to be the one where values stop increasing or the gravy train stops? It's almost like then I think everyone's the same with this, even with residential. You look 5 years past that point, you go, Jesus, I picked that. So having Dad there, who's a lot older and been, as you said with your father, been through it all before, a couple of times I've brought deals to him that I thought were fantastic. And I've said, geez, I just wonder whether we're playing a bit over. And Dad will go, no, we're all right. And, that sort of back up, that confidence. All right, done.
Yeah.
And invariably, he has been right most of the time. We got one wrong together, which was the Newport Arms Hotel. I wish to this day we owned it. We both stuffed it up. But because of that, what we were just saying, we thought Justin ended up buying it, our competitor, who's a mate. Don't get me wrong, but that would be another waterfront. I love the waterfronts, as I've told you. That would have been another one that would have gone really well in our portfolio. But, it's just that confidence that we discussed. Sometimes you do second guess yourself.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think everyone has that in different ways, but I think the more successful people, I think, probably assume that they don't. Do you know what I mean? Like they just, you do what you do. But I think that's human nature, isn't it?
Absolutely. Mate, there's a young guy in Sydney. Oh, he's not that young. He's probably my age. He's a great bloke. His name's Wazza. About 25 years ago, ages ago, he started a fanatical sporting supporters group that used to paint themselves yellow and go to every Aussie match around the globe.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
They were called the Fanatics. He turned into a travel company because he'd had thousands of people wanting to travel, and it was just brilliant what he did. But he cashed out of that probably around 2010, I'm going to sort of guess, and started having to go in the pub game. And I knew him through mutual friends, and he started talking to me, and we ended up selling him a couple of pubs that we couldn't make a go of. Mate, he's got them firing better than anyone ever could have. He's become an extremely successful publican. But mate, he's backed himself every step of the way. We all speak to each other, and mate, I take as much advice from him as he takes from me. And
Yeah,
he
okay.
started up by himself and had a go, but he
That's
backed.
really interesting. Yeah, right. It's amazing. So what's next for the business in terms of the next sort of 5, 10 years, that sort of stuff?
It really depends on Dad. You know, it's the great unknown. And whenever I bring up that he's 82, I always, to soften the blow, say that him and I are racing each other to the end, because I've had a very entertaining life, let's call it.
Yep.
I try to soften the blow for him, but you know, a reality is, if something were to happen to Dad, the 4 children, I think, would go, you know, much, much more corporate. I think we'd start doing much more strategic partnerships with the different sides of our business. You know, we've had people come at us for years to do that, you know, involving those investment bankers we mentioned before who want, but, you know, I've been through a lot of this for 20 years, and I think we would structure it just a little differently. Well, actually, probably majorly differently. Dad's not a great seller. Dad's sort of, I think at his 80th birthday, he enjoyed telling a story how he's still got his first scooter. And
All right.
I think he sort of wears it as a badge of honor, whereas someone like a Lang or a Gerry, those guys, what I think they have over Dad is that they know when there's a dud and they can get rid of it, sort of thing. So
Yeah, okay.
I guess in the next 5 to 10 years, if the 4 kids have anything more to do with it, you know, I think we'll get rid of a lot of deck chairs, so to speak,
Mhm.
and start focusing on the bigger side of our portfolio, and then the diversified. We've just put on a family chairman. So, yeah, it will just become a lot more professional. And that's not to have a shot at Dad, because the reason it's so big is, ironically, is because of how unprofessional he was. You know, through the 80s, 90s, the way he grew, and there was no rhyme or reason except that not too much debt, you know, but he knew what
But, you know,
he did.
some of that stuff is the absence of bureaucracy back then
Yep.
is a big contributor, right? So if you bring in those layers of bureaucracy too soon, it can actually stymie growth. There
Agreed.
comes a point where you get to a certain size where you're obviously, you know, and sky's the limit and all that sort of stuff, but where that bureaucracy, for lack of a better word, is actually necessary in terms of the improved governance, all those different things that go with the next stage. There's always a next stage, right?
Yep. You know, if you're not going forward, you're standing still, sort of thing, or whatever the saying is. But, you know, we certainly, as 4 kids, we discuss it quite often. And I agree with you. It is now time for us. You know, Dad's got, well, it's not just Dad anymore. The 4 kids have been heavily involved for years now. Between the 5 of us and a lot of peripheral people, obviously, we've grown to a size where, you know, I think you can get more out of it now by putting in these layers.
Yeah. There comes a point where that is necessary to a point, and no one likes extra bureaucracy, but there's just certainly time. And I say bureaucracy, but there's probably a better word for it. But you know, you do need some of that sort of governance and some of those layers of to become more professional.
I think that's a good word. It describes us well. You know, it's certainly in the last couple of years, there's a lot of stuff just not getting done, and they're very profitable sides of the business that it's no one's fault. You know, we're just starting to ignore things. So anyway, we're at that level.
That's awesome.
Question, next 5 to 10, we will go heavily that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, Stu, thanks very much for your time, mate. This has been an awesome chat.
Hopefully that was good.